The heat in the Arizona Territory, around 1876, was not just heat, it was a weight. It pressed the dust into the streets of Dry Willow until the road was a rutted, pale ribbon between buildings that leaned on each other for support. Saloons with tin roofs shimmered like false water, and the boardwalks groaned under the boot heels of miners and freight men. From the edge of town, Elena Ward could hear the faint, high whistle of the steam engine, miles away. It was the sound of progress. The politicians said, to her, it sounded like a scream. Elena was 28 years old. Though some days she felt she had lived a century, she was a widow. Her husband, Silas, had been swallowed by the earth in a copper mine collapse 2 years prior. He had been a good man, a quiet man, and he had left her with a good name, a pile of debt, and a silence in her small adobe clinic that felt as deep as the mine shaft that took him. Her clinic was a temporary thing, a lean-to against the last sturdy building on the main street, facing the open expanse of saguaro and red rock. Inside, the air smelled of carbolic soap, lye, and dried herbs. She was meticulous. She scrubbed her instruments in boiling water until her hands were raw, but they were steady. She was a nurse of the frontier, a woman who knew the geography of a gunshot wound better than she knew her own heart. She could set a bone, stitch a flap of skin, and stop a man from bleeding out onto a saloon floor. She had learned on battlefields further east, and the knowledge had stuck. But there was one thing she could not fix, one wound she could not heal. Her body had failed her. In a world that measured a woman's worth by the sons she bore and the daughters she raised, Elena Ward was barren. The silence in her home was the agonizing, constant silence of the child she would never hold. It was a private grief, a shame that sat on her chest heavier than the Arizona sun, suffocating her in the quiet hours after sunset. This grief made her separate. The other women in Dry Willow, the wives of merchants and miners, spoke of pregnancies and baptisms in hushed, proud tones at the general store. Elena spoke of poultices and sutures. She was useful, a necessity like the blacksmith or the undertaker, but she was not one of them. She did not belong to their circle of creation. A thin red scarf hung on a peg by her clinic door. It had been her husband's, worn around his neck to keep the mine dust out. Now, she used it to tie back her dark hair when she worked, or to wipe the sweat from her brow, or sometimes to cover her face when the dust storms blew in from the east. It was a boundary, a small patch of color in a world of brown and gray, a thread connecting her to a life that was gone. On her small, scrubbed pine desk sat a ledger. It was pristine. The pages were white, empty, ruled with pale blue lines. She had bought it the week Silas died, thinking she would start a new life, keep new accounts, impose order on the chaos. But she could not bring herself to make the first mark. To write in it would be to admit the old life was truly over, to draw a final line under his name. So it sat, a testament to a future she was too afraid to begin. The tension in Dry Willow had pulled tighter in recent months. The fear was palpable, an acrid taste in the back of every throat. It was the fear of the Apache, the railroad. The great Copper and Crown Corporation wanted to lay track toward the mountains, straight through the heart of the high desert. They bought land cheap, cleared it fast, and their surveyors pushed deeper and deeper into territory the Apache considered sacred, the land where they hunted and prayed. Marshall Hale, the man who wore the town's badge, seemed more concerned with the railroad's payroll than with justice. He was a greedy man, with pale eyes that assessed the value of everything, including people. He drank his whiskey with Giles Vickers, the railroad foreman. Vickers was a cruel man, known for his cold efficiency. He was tasked with clearing the path, and he did not care if that path ran over rocks, graves, or people who stood in his way. To do his clearing, Vickers employed the Gray Spurs, a gang of hired riders who wore their pistols low and their morals lower. They were the fist of the Copper and Crown. and they moved through the territory with an arrogance that bred violence. Elena had tried to stay out of it. Her world was small, defined by the four walls of her clinic. She treated the railroad men when they stumbled in, drunk or injured in their haste. She treated the townsfolk for fevers and broken limbs. Her domain was the body, not the soul, and certainly not the politics of the land. Until 3 weeks ago, it had been near dusk. A storm was brewing, the sky a bruised purple, the air heavy with the smell of ozone and dry earth. She had been emptying her basin of bloody water when she saw the movement by the dry creek bed. It was a boy, an Apache boy, no older than 10. He was alone, and he was holding his side, his small face tight with a pain that went beyond his years. He had fallen from a ledge while tracking a jackrabbit, and a jagged piece of rock had opened a deep gash in his leg, right down to the bone. She had looked around. The street was empty. The town was battening down for the storm. She had hissed, a low sound, and motioned with her head. "Here, quickly." He fought her when she got him inside, his dark eyes wide with a terror she recognized. It was the terror of the trapped. He did not speak. She did not speak. She simply worked. She pushed him onto the cot, held him down with one arm, and went about her business. She cleaned the wound, stitched it with neat, practiced motions, and bandaged it with clean linen. Her hands did not shake. She gave him water and a piece of hardtack, which he devoured. Before the moon was high, while the first winds of the storm rattled her door, he had slipped back out and vanished into the shadows. She told no one. It was a thing between her and the desert, but the desert had eyes. A rumor started, a whisper in the saloon, a suspicious glance at the mercantile, the nurse on the edge of town. She helps them. She gives aid to the enemy. The looks she received changed. They were no longer looks of pity for the childless widow. They were looks of suspicion, of anger, of fear. Elena felt the shift. The town was drawing a line in the dust, and she had unknowingly stepped over it. Miles away, in the high canyons where the wind spoke a different language, Chayton watched the sun dip behind the red mesas. He was a man of about 32 years, built of silence and discipline. His body was lean, hardened by the land. His eyes were the color of the deepest shadows, and they missed nothing. He saw the hawk circling on the thermals, the lizard skittering on the hot rock, and the distant, unnatural plume of dust that signaled the railroad's relentless advance. He was Apache. He had once been a scout for the army, a tracker renowned for his skill. He had led them, believing in a promise of peace, until he led them to a place they should not have gone, a place that ended in gunfire and betrayal. The guilt of that day was a stone in his gut. He had left, walked away from their uniforms and their ration tickets and their lies, and never looked back. He was not alone. 4 children were with him, shadows at his side. Tala, the oldest girl at 11, was quiet and watchful, her eyes already holding the grief of a woman. Nantan, a boy of 9, stubborn as a mule and desperate to prove his strength. Luyu and Vico, the youngest, who still woke crying from dreams of smallpox and raids. They were his niece, his nephews, his cousins. Their parents were gone, taken by the white man's sickness or the white man's bullets. They were his blood, his responsibility. They were his to protect. He was teaching Nantan how to read the earth. "The rabbit," Chayton said, his voice low, pointing to a faint impression in the dust. He was scared. See how deep the back feet dug in? He was running from the hawk. He was a warrior, but his fight now was for them. It was a daily fight for food, for water, for a future that the world was trying to erase. His greatest secret, and his people's greatest treasure, was Tuashin, the springs, in a land defined by thirst. Tuashin was the lifeblood. It was not a grand river, but a series of hidden underground pathways that surfaced in shaded groves, providing water that was sweet and constant. It was where the deer came to drink, where the herbs for medicine grew. It was sacred. Chaiton carried the map of these pathways in his memory. It was a map given to him by his grandfather, a map not of lines, but of stories and rock formations and the slant of the morning sun. It was a sacred trust, and the Copper and Crown Railroad wanted it. They did not know where it was, but their surveyors knew it existed. Their engines were thirsty. Their work crews were thirsty. Giles Vickers, the man who ran the crews, knew that controlling the water meant controlling the territory. It was that simple. Chaiton had seen the wooden stakes. They were getting closer. Little scars of raw pine driven into the ancient earth. He had pulled them up, one by one, tossing them into a ravine. But more always appeared, creeping closer like a disease. He looked at the children, huddled by the small fire where Tala was roasting agave hearts. They were a family, chosen by survival. They deserved to grow. They deserved to live. Back in Dry Willow, Marshall Hale finished his third whiskey of the afternoon. He looked out the saloon's dusty window, past the brothel, toward Elena's clinic. That small piece of land, right on the edge of town, would make a fine depot for the Copper and Crown, a place to store rails and supplies. Giles Vickers had mentioned it just yesterday, and Vickers paid well for suggestions. Haley knew about the rumor, the nurse and the Apache boy. It was useful. A town scared was a town that could be led. He could use that rumor. He could paint her as a sympathizer, an outcast. An outcast had no allies. An outcast's property was easy to condemn, easy to take. Elena, finishing her cleaning as the light began to fail, felt a chill despite the evening heat. She saw the gray spurs ride past. They did not look at her, but she felt their presence like a physical threat, a wave of cold menace. She went to her desk and touched the clean white cover of the ledger. She felt trapped by her past, trapped by the town's suspicion, and trapped by a future that felt as empty as her womb. Far up in the hills, Chaiton was finishing a small gate for their temporary camp. It was made of lashed cedar branches. It was not much, but it was a line, a boundary. He took his knife and, in the fading purple light, he carved letters into the top branch. The letters were rough, but clear. The words were simple, a declaration, a promise to the children and to the land. Not for sale. The knock came at dawn. It was not a tap. It was the flat, hard fist of authority on her flimsy clinic door. Marshall Hale stood on the threshold, the rising sun at his back, turning him into a dark silhouette. His pale eyes were not on her. They were already inside, assessing her cot, her small table, her shelves of glass bottles. "Elena Ward," he said, his voice as dry as the dust in the street. He held up a folded paper. "By order of the Territorial Authority, and in the interest of public safety, this structure and the land it occupies are hereby condemned." Elena's heart, which had been sitting like a cold stone in her chest, gave a painful lurch. Condemned. For what this building is sound? Hale finally looked at her. His gaze was cold, devoid of any pity. "The Copper and Crown Railroad requires this parcel for a supply depot. Progress, ma'am." He tucked the paper into his vest pocket. "And frankly, the good citizens of Dry Willow are tired of harboring those who give aid and comfort to the enemy." The rumor, the boy she had stitched up, it had festered. "I am a nurse," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I took an oath to treat whoever needs care." "That oath does not apply to savages who murder settlers," Hale said. He stepped aside. Two of his deputies, new men who looked more like hired thugs from the gray spurs, moved past him into the clinic. "You have 1 hour to vacate. Your personal effects will be sold at public auction at 10 o'clock to pay for your debts to this community." "Debts," she cried, as one of the men grabbed her medical bag. "I owe no one." "You owe this town your loyalty," Hale snapped. "And you failed to pay." He turned and walked away. The hour passed in a blur of humiliation. The deputies tossed her things into the street. Her cot, her few blankets, the small wooden chest that held her husband's clothes. By 9 o'clock, a crowd had gathered. It was market day, and the street was full of ranchers, miners, and their wives. They stared. Some looked ashamed, but most looked angry. Their faces hard. Fear had poisoned them. A crude sign had been nailed to her clinic door, the tar still dripping in the heat. Apache lover. At 10 o'clock precisely, Marshal Hale returned. He stood on the boardwalk, a makeshift auction block. "We are here," he bellowed, "to purge this town of a blight." He pointed at Elena, who stood alone by her pile of belongings, the deputies watching her like hawks. "This woman, Elena Ward, has betrayed our trust. She has used her skills to heal the very animals that hunt us. Her property is forfeit." "Traitor!" a man shouted from the back, which a woman hissed, pulling her child closer. Elena stood, her body numb, her hands clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. She clutched the red scarf that had been in her pocket. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. "Let us begin," Hale yelled. "What am I bid for this fine cut?" 2 cents, someone laughed. 1 cent for the Apache lover's bed. They were picking her life apart, piece by piece, turning her meager existence into a cruel sport. She closed her eyes, the sun burning hot against her lids. She was finished. She would be run out of town with nothing, left to die in the desert. The laughter suddenly stopped. A silence fell over the crowd. It was so abrupt, so heavy, that Elena opened her eyes. The sea of angry faces had parted. A man was walking through the space they had made. He was Apache. He moved with a liquid grace that made the booted men around him look clumsy and coarse. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple cotton shirt. His black hair was tied back from a face that looked carved from the same red rock that towered over the town. His eyes were dark, fixed, and held a stillness that was terrifying. It was Chaitin. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Hale. He walked past Elena as if she were not there. He stopped at the boardwalk where Hale stood. The deputies shifted, their hands moving nervously toward their pistols. Chaitin reached into a leather pouch at his waist. He pulled out a heavy deerskin bag. With a quiet, deliberate motion, he placed it on the boardwalk at Hale's feet. It landed with a dull, heavy thud, the sound of silver. Hale stared at the bag, his bluster momentarily gone. "What is the meaning of this? This is a legal proceeding." "Apache." Chaitin's voice was low, but it cut through the silence like a knife. "She comes with me." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Hale's face flushed red. "You cannot buy her. This is not a slave market. Her property is forfeit." Chaitin did not raise his voice. He did not move. Her debts. The silver pays them. He finally raised his eyes, and his gaze was so cold, so direct, that Hale took half a step back. "She comes with me. There. No one judges." He turned his head and looked at Elena. It was the first time he had acknowledged her. His expression did not change. He was not offering kindness. He was stating a fact. Elena's entire body was trembling. She looked at Hale, the man of the law, who was robbing her in broad daylight. She looked at the faces of the crowd, people she had treated, people she had shared bread with, now twisted with righteous hate. Then she looked back at Chaitin. He was the enemy, a savage, the man the town blamed for their fear. He was also the only person who had spoken for her. This was not salvation. It was, perhaps, just a different kind of prison. But it was the only choice she had. To stay was to be crushed. To go was to face the unknown. She took a single, shuddering breath. She let her hands unclench. She took one step, then another, walking away from her life, from her clinic, from the town that had cast her out. She stopped, standing near him but not beside him. Chaitin nodded once, a gesture so small it was almost invisible. He turned and walked back through the crowd, which parted for him like water for a stone. Elena followed. She did not look back. She left her cot, her desk, and her white, empty ledger sitting in the dust of the street. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the red scarf clutched in her hand. His wagon was hidden in a dry arroyo behind the tannery, well away from the main street. It was a sturdy, battered wagon, drawn by 2 strong mules. 4 children were huddled in the back. 4 pairs of dark, wary eyes watched her as she approached. A girl, the oldest, perhaps 11, held a sleeping boy in her lap. Her name was Tala. 2 other boys, Nantan and Luyu, sat pressed together, their faces miniature masks of suspicion. They stared at Elena as if she were a ghost, or perhaps a wolf. Shaitan did not speak. He put his hands on her waist, strong and impersonal, and lifted her onto the wagon seat. His touch was brief, all business. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. The wagon lurched, the wheels grating on the rock, and they moved out. They left Dry Willow behind, heading east toward the canyons, toward the open, dangerous land. The journey lasted for hours. The sun beat down. The air between Elena and Chaitin was thick and silent. She did not know what to say. He did not seem to be a man who valued words. The silence was broken only by the creak of the wagon and the occasional, hushed whisper from the children in the back. They climbed, leaving the low desert for the higher country, where the air was thinner and smelled of cedar and hot stone. Just as the sun was beginning to touch the western mesas, turning the sky to blood and gold, they arrived. It was not a camp, but a place, a deep fold in the red rock, sheltered by a stand of ancient, twisted cedar trees. It was hidden, defensible, and quiet. A small, smokeless fire was already burning in a stone-ringed pit. The children scrambled from the wagon with practiced silence. They were not like town children, full of noise and questions. They were like fawns, all eyes and quick, quiet movements. They went to the fire, Tala immediately checking a pot that was nestled in the coals. Shaitan began to unhitch the mules, his movements economical and sure. "Why, Elena finally asked." Her voice was a dry croak. "Why did you do that?" He continued his work, his back to her. "I needed someone." She waited. He finished with the harness and turned to her. The setting sun caught the angles of his face. "The children, they need a woman." He seemed to be searching for the right words. Someone not cruel. He looked at the fire, where Tala was trying to comfort the youngest boy, Vico, who was waking. "I need a person who will not hurt them," Chaitin said, his voice flat. "The silver was for your clinic, for your tools. You are here for them." He met her gaze. "No one owes anyone. It is a trade." Elena understood. This was not charity. It was a contract. She was not a guest. She was an employee, hired with the last of his silver. She was here to be useful. It was a role she knew well, but the ache in her chest, the old, familiar shame of her barrenness, felt different here. It was not a failure. It was, for him, a qualification. She was not a mother. She was just not cruel. She nodded. Later, as the air grew sharp with the desert cold, she sat near the fire. She watched the children. The boy named Luyu was shivering. His thin cotton shirt was torn at the shoulder. The old instinct took over, the need to mend. She had nothing. Then she remembered. She reached into the deep pocket of her skirt. Her fingers found it, a small spool of black suture thread and a curved needle, kept for emergencies. She motioned to the boy. "Come." He looked at Chaitin. Chaitin watched them, his face impassive. He gave a single small nod. Luyu crept closer, his eyes fixed on her face. Elena knelt in the dust. "Your shirt," she said softly. "Hold still." Her hands, which had trembled with rage and fear all day, were now perfectly steady. She pulled the torn edges of the fabric together. Her stitches were small, neat and efficient. The battlefield stitch. The boy stood impossibly still, watching the needle flash. When she was finished, she bit the thread clean with her teeth. Tala was ladling a thin corn soup into tin cups. Elena rose and went to the wagon. She found Chaitin's supply bags, salt, a small pouch of dried chili. She brought them to the fire. Tala glared at her, her small body tense. Elena did not ask permission. She took the spoon, added a pinch of salt and a tiny bit of chili, and stirred. She tasted it. It was better. She ladled a cup and handed it to Luyu. He drank, his eyes never leaving her. That night, she slept on the hard ground near the fire. Apart from the children, the coyotes sang from the dark ridges, their voices sharp and wild. The air was full of pale, flickering lights, like fireflies made of ash. She was terrified, exhausted, and utterly alone. But for the first time in 2 years, she was not suffocating. Miles away, in the bright lamplight of the Copper and Crown field office, Giles Vickers read a scout's report. "He is still at it. Sir, the same man, the Apache scout who left the army. He pulled every survey stake we put north of Serpent Cut. He knows where the water is. I'm sure of it." Vickers poured a measure of whiskey into his glass. "Marshal Hale has dealt with the nurse problem in Dry Willow. The depot land is secured." "Good." He swirled the amber liquid. "Now, focus on the real asset. I want that water. Find him. Find that scout and the children he protects. I do not care what it costs. Find him." The first few days at Cedar Ridge were a blur of smoke, dust, and silence. Elena fell into a routine dictated by the sun and the needs of the children. She was a nurse. She knew work. She cleaned. She mended. She allocated the meager rations of corn and dried meat. The children watched her. Tala, the oldest, watched her with open suspicion, her small arms crossed, guarding the younger ones. Nantan watched her with curiosity, as if she were a strange, pale animal. Luyu and Vico just watched her with the wide, empty eyes of children who had seen too much. The accident happened on the 3rd day. Chayton was gone, scouting the perimeter. Nantan, in a fit of 9-year-old bravado, had taken the camp hatchet, trying to prove he could chop wood like the man. Vico, the youngest, had toddled too close, drawn by the rhythmic thudding. The sound that broke the afternoon stillness was not the thunk of blade on wood. It was a sharp crack, followed by a thin, terrified scream. Elena was there before the echo died. Vico was on the ground, his small hands covered in blood, his own and that of his leg. The hatchet lay beside him. Nantan was frozen, his face a mask of white terror. Elena's training took over, a cold, clean wave of purpose. Tala, the water skin, the clean one. Nantan, "Do not move. Luyu, bring me the bandages from my bag." She knelt beside Vico, her hands already pressing down on the wound, ignoring his shrieks. The hatchet had slipped, biting deep into the boy's calf. It was a vicious, gaping cut, bleeding heavily. Chayton arrived seconds later, appearing from the rocks as if by magic. He saw the hatchet, the blood, and his son on the ground. He froze, his entire body coiling with a helpless, paternal fear. He took one step, then stopped, watching Elena. "Hold him still," Elena commanded, not looking up. Chayton knelt opposite her, placing his large, steady hands on Vico's small shoulders. "Shh, Vico, shh," Elena whispered, her voice low and calm, cutting through the boy's panic. She looked directly into his eyes. "Breathe with me. You must breathe. In, out, slow. That is good. We fix cuts. This is just a cut." She pulled her suture needle from her bag. Her hands did not shake. She worked quickly, her stitches small and perfect, closing the wound with an efficiency that was almost brutal in its gentleness. The boy's screams quieted to pained whimpers. His gaze locked on her face, as she tied the final knot and began to wrap the clean bandage. Vico's small body relaxed. He was exhausted, his terror fading. He looked at her, his dark eyes brimming with tears, and let out a single, shuddering sigh. He whispered it, a sound she almost missed. "Ma." Elena's hands stopped. The world tilted. The sun felt cold. That one, Small words struck her more violently than any blow. It was a name she had been denied, a title she had no right to. Her stomach twisted with a familiar, bitter cold. She was a fraud. She was the dry earth, the empty womb. She finished the bandage, her movements suddenly stiff and mechanical. She stood up, avoiding Chaitan's gaze, and went to the stream to wash the blood from her hands. She scrubbed until her skin was raw, as if she could wash away the word he had spoken. Chaitan watched her go. He watched her rigid back. He did not understand the nature of her pain, but he understood what she had just done. She had saved his son. He had offered her a trade, and she was honoring it. She was, as he had hoped, not cruel. That evening, after the children were in a restless sleep, he motioned to her. "Come." He led her from the camp, up a narrow, hidden path that was invisible in the twilight. They climbed for nearly 20 minutes, the air growing cooler, damper. Elena could smell water. He stopped in a small grove of cottonwoods, a patch of impossible green in a world of red and brown. There, weeping from a fissure in the rock, was a seep. It was not a gushing spring, but a steady, cold trickle of pure water that pooled in a stone basin before vanishing back into the sand. It was alive. "Tuwashin," Chaitan said. His voice was low, reverent. "The life of the mountain. It is why we are here. It is what the railroad wants." He knelt and cupped his hands, drinking. He looked up at her, the moonlight catching the water on his face. "They think it is a river they can find. They are wrong. It is a path, under the ground. My grandfather showed me the path. He touched his temple. They want what is in my head. If they get this, they will put a great iron pipe in it, and they will suck this land dry. Every plant, every animal. All will die of thirst. All for their machine." Elena stared at the water. It was the heart of the land. "I show you this," he said, standing, "so you know what we are protecting. It is not just the children. It is this, the life." He was trusting her with the secret that defined their existence. The trust was tested 2 nights later. A cold moon hung in the sky. Chaitan was gone, checking his snare lines. Elena was banking the fire when she heard it. A sound that did not belong, the faint scrape of a boot on stone, the jingle of a metal spur. Her blood turned to ice. She moved instantly, kicking dirt onto the fire. She ran to the sleeping children, shaking Tala and Nantan awake. Into the rocks. She hissed, "Now!" Not a sound. The children, trained by a life of fear, vanished into the deep shadows of the overhang. Elena crouched with them, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 riders. Their silhouettes were dark against the sky. Gray spurs. They had found the wagon tracks. "He is here," a low voice growled. "Vickers wants the tracker. And the woman. Find them." The men dismounted, their guns drawn, spreading out to search the camp. Suddenly, Chaitan was there. He did not come from the path. He dropped from the branches of the dark cedar above them, a shadow detaching from other shadows. He landed on the first man's back, a knife in his hand. The man went down with a wet, gurgling sound. The second man spun, firing his pistol. The shot was deafening. The muzzle flash a violent orange blossom in the dark. The bullet sparked off the rock, yards from where Elena and the children hid. Chaitan rolled and came up under the man's guard, driving his shoulder into the man's gut. The man's pistol flew wide. The third rider, seeing his companions fall, turned to run, but Chaitan was already moving. He threw his knife. It spun end over end, catching the man in the back. The man screamed and fell. Silence. Elena's body was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Chaitan stood in the moonlight, his chest heaving. 2 men were dead. The one who had fired the pistol was on the ground, clutching his side, cursing and sobbing. He was alive. Chaitan retrieved his knife. He walked toward the wounded man, his face a mask of cold fury. He raised the knife to finish it. "No!" Elena's voice was sharp. cutting through the night. Chaitan stopped. He turned to look at her, his eyes black pits. "He will bring more," he said, his voice a low growl. "You are not them," she said, stepping out from the rocks, her body still trembling. "We do not murder wounded men." She walked past him, ignoring the menace that rolled off him. She knelt by the cursing, bleeding man. He was young, no older than 20, his face pale with shock. You are the nurse," the man stammered, his eyes wide. "Be quiet," she said. She got her bag, suture, bandages. "He is the enemy," Chaitan said, his voice tight with disbelief. "He is a man," she said, her hands already working, staunching the flow of blood. "And I am a nurse. That is my oath." She worked quickly, her hands steady once more. She packed the wound, stitched it tight, and bandaged it. When she was done, she stood up. The young rider had fainted from the pain. Chaitan stared at her, a strange expression on his face. He said nothing. He took the man's pistol and ammunition. He bound his hands and feet. They packed the camp in silence before they left. Chaitan hauled the wounded man onto his own horse and tethered it to a tree by the main trail. "He will be found by his own," Chaitan said, "or he will not. It is not our choice." They moved camp in the dark, traveling deeper into the ridges. The rumor would spread. She knew. The Apache-loving nurse, the woman who healed her own attackers. The drought worsened. The creek beds were bone dry. The air was heavy with dust. In Dry Willow, the news of the wounded gray spur, found barely alive, fueled the town's hatred. Reverend Pike delivered a sermon on serpents in our midst, and the women of the town whispered that Elena Ward was a witch, allied with the heathens. In the new camp, smaller and more hidden, Elena drew on a flat piece of scavenged wood with a piece of charcoal. She drew a large letter. "A," she said to the children, who huddled around her. They were frightened after the attack, clinging to her. Vico's ma had been picked up by Luyu. The sound both warmed and terrified her. She focused on the alphabet. It was something solid, something she could give. That night, Luyu woke from a nightmare, screaming. Elena pulled him onto her lap, rocking him gently. She found herself humming, and then singing. A half-remembered lullaby her mother had sung to her, about the moon and a silver boat. Her voice was thin, but it was steady. Chaitan watched her from the darkness, watched this strange white woman sing his child back to sleep. A week later, a rider approached the ridge. He was not a gray spur. He wore the uniform of a copper and crown surveyor. He stopped 100 yards from their camp, clearly under orders. "I have a letter for Elena Ward," he shouted, "from Mr. Vickers." He left it on a large, flat rock and rode away. Elena retrieved it with a sense of dread. The envelope was thick, expensive, but the handwriting on the letter inside was terrifyingly familiar. It was not from Vickers. It was from Thomas, her first husband, the man who had left her when she had failed to conceive, the man who had called her a barren field and gone east to find his fortune. She had not seen his name in 5 years. The letter was full of elegant, false sentiment. He was working as a secretary for Giles Vickers. He had heard of her unfortunate situation in Dry Willow. He wrote of his regret. He offered her a way out, return to civilization. "My dear Elena," he wrote, "Mr. Vickers is a reasonable man. He bears you no ill will. He only needs to know where the Apache tracker is hiding. Tell us, there is a place for you here, with me." She read the letter twice. He was asking her to sell Chaitan, to sell the children, for a place at the side of the man who had discarded her. She looked at Vico, who was tracing the letter A in the dust. She looked at Chaitan, who was mending a trap, his hands strong and patient. That night, she sat by the fire, the letter in her lap. When Chaitan sat across from her, she looked him in the eye. Then she leaned forward and placed the letter in the center of the flames. She watched the neat, elegant script turn black and curl into ash. He watched it burn. He said nothing. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice so low she had to lean in. I was a scout. For the army. His confession came out flat, heavy. I thought I could make peace. I thought I could lead them on paths that would keep them away from my people. His hands clenched. I led a patrol. I told them the canyon was empty. I did not see the signs. It was a winter camp. Women, old ones, my own cousins. He closed his eyes. They killed them. I led them there. His voice was choked with a guilt so old it was part of his bones. I ran. I left the army. This, he nodded at the sleeping children, is my penance. I will not fail again. Elena looked at this broken, powerful man. We are both paying for things. Chayton, she said softly. The next morning, the air was clear. The drought was at its peak. A rumor had come with the surveyor the railroad was stalled. They were desperate for water. They were planning to bend the track, to cut straight through Cedar Ridge, straight toward the hidden seep. Chayton took a heavy piece of cedar plank. He spent an hour carving into it with his knife. When he was done, he drove it into the ground at the narrow entrance to their camp. The letters were deep and defiant. Not for sale. The high desert was a study in thirst. The drought had scoured the land, leaving the earth cracked and gray. The plants brittle skeletons of their former selves. Elena, a woman trained to heal, felt the land's sickness as a personal affront. She could not make it rain, but she would not sit and watch it die. In a small, protected patch of earth behind their camp, where the sun hit for only half the day, she began her garden. It was an act of defiance, a gesture of irrational faith. She had found a small cloth bag at the bottom of her salvaged supplies, forgotten seeds from her clinic kitchen in Dry Willow. Tomato seeds. Chayton watched her, his face impassive. He saw her kneeling in the dust, her hands, which he had seen stitch a boy's leg and pack a bullet wound, now coaxing the unforgiving soil. It will not grow, he said, not unkindly. The ground is dead. Then I will bring it back to life, she said, not looking up. She used their precious water. Each morning, she took 1 cup from the seep, 2 ashin, and carried it back, pouring it with reverence onto the small patch of turned earth. She sang to it, the same lullaby she sang to Luyu, a quiet, tuneless humming. The children watched her. It was a ritual they did not understand, but it was a ritual of care, and they understood that. Weeks passed. The land remained brutal, but in the small, protected patch, 6 tiny, impossible green shoots pushed their way through the crust. They were fragile, barely alive, but they were green, the first tomatoes in a land of thirst. They became a symbol. The drought made the predators bold. The coyotes had always been a presence, their thin voices stitched into the fabric of the night. But now, the wolves came, larger, smarter, hungrier. A small pack, led by a large gray male, began to circle the camp, their eyes glowing like cold green lamps in the firelight. The children were terrified. Elena felt the old, cold fear in her own stomach. Chayton gathered the children. You are not rocks, he told them, his voice low and intense. You are not bushes. You must be the grass, the wind. You must move so the earth does not feel you. You must breathe so the air does not hear you. He showed them how to walk, heel to toe, placing each foot with deliberate care, how to blend their small bodies into the shadows of the rocks. But this was not enough. The wolves were testing them, coming closer each night. Elena, a woman of science, not snares, watch the wind. If we cannot fight them, we must make this place unbearable for them, she said. They are not afraid of fire, Chayton said. They will be afraid of this fire, she replied. She explained, a smoke trap. They worked together. It was the first time they moved as a single unit, a family bound by a common threat. Chayton, with his intimate knowledge of the land, went out and gathered green, sappy juniper branches and damp, rotted wood. Elena, with her tactical battlefield knowledge, chose the spot a narrow cleft in the rock, downwind from the camp, but upwind from the wolves' usual approach. The children, silent as the grass Chaitan had taught them to be, helped stack the wood. Tala and Nantan dragging branches, Luyu and Vico carrying armfuls of damp leaves. That night, the wolves came. They were closer now, arrogant. The gray male let out a low growl, a promise of violence. At Elena's signal, Chaitan put a burning brand to the base of the pile. It did not flame, it smoldered, and then it billowed. A thick, acrid, choking cloud of green-white smoke poured out of the cleft and rolled down the ridge, clinging to the ground. It was the smell of a forest on fire, a suffocating, unnatural stench. The wolves panicked. They yelped. They whined. They coughed. The smoke burned their sensitive noses, blinding them. They scrambled to escape it, tumbling over each other in their haste to get to clean air. In a minute, they were gone. Elena and Chaitan stood side by side, watching the smoke clear. They did not touch. They did not speak. But a new understanding had formed between them. His strength and her strategy. Together, they had protected their home. The human wolves came 2 days later. This time, Marshal Hale did not come with deputies. He came alone, carrying a white cloth tied to a stick. He stopped 100 yards from the camp, in the open. "Mrs. Ward!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the clear air. "I come to talk. I am a reasonable man." Chaitan's hand went to his knife, but he remained in the shadows of the rocks. Elena stepped out, shielding her eyes from the sun. "What do you want?" "Marshal, I am here to offer you a deal," he said, walking closer, but not too close. He ignored Chaitan, as if the man did not exist. "This situation, it is unfortunate. You are a white woman, a good woman. You do not belong out here with him." He reached into his vest. He pulled out a thick fold of cash and a formal-looking paper. "This is $500. And this," he waved the paper, "is a territorial protection warrant, signed by me. It guarantees your safe passage to Tucson. You and the children, you can start over. A new life." Elena's heart beat a slow, cold rhythm. "What is the price, Marshal?" Hale smiled, a thin, reptilian stretching of his lips. "Mr. Vickers is a reasonable man. He bears no ill will. He just needs to know where the water is. This Apache, he is hoarding it. That is a crime in a time of drought. Just tell us where he hides the spring. That is all. You ride out. He stays." Elena looked at the cedar stake Chaitan had driven into the ground. Not for sale. She looked back at the tiny green tomato plants, fighting for life. She looked at Hale, at the money in his hand, the lie on his paper. "This is my home, Marshal," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "We are not for sale." Hale's smile vanished. The pretense of civility evaporated. His eyes were like chips of ice. "You are a fool, woman. You are choosing death. When we come back, this warrant will be for your arrest, not your protection." He spat in the dust, turned, and rode away. The threat solidified their bond. They were no longer just allies. They were partners in a siege. The lessons began. Chaitan took her high onto the ridges, away from the camp. "You must learn to see," he said. He taught her the land. He showed her how the hawks rode the invisible currents of the air, and what that said about the coming weather. He pointed out the scrape of a mountain lion's claw on a rock, the delicate, almost invisible track of a fox. "You look at things," he told her. "You must look through them. See the story? The land is always speaking." In the evenings, by the fire, she taught him. She used charcoal on a piece of smooth, pale bark. She taught him the alphabet, the hard, angular shapes of the white man's words. She watched his large, strong hands, hands that could kill a man or set a snare, struggle to form the letters. She taught him to write his name, Chayton. She taught him her medicine. You must boil the water, she explained. Even the water from Tuashin. If you use it on a wound, the heat kills the invisible spirits that bring the sickness. She taught him about infection, about cleanliness, about how a body heals. It was a fair exchange. He was giving her the knowledge to survive the desert. She was giving him the knowledge to survive the world that was trying to erase him. Hale was true to his word. A week later, a posse of 4 deputies rode up the canyon. They were not subtle. Elena Ward by the authority of the Arizona Territory. I have a warrant for your arrest. You are charged with aiding and abetting a hostile fugitive and treason against the United States. They were trapped. The deputies were spreading out, coming up the trail. Take the children, Chayton said, his voice urgent. Low. Go to the seep, the path behind the large rock. Do not make a sound. Do not stop until you are there. What about you, she whispered, her hands gripping Tala and Luyu. Go, now! She ran, pushing the terrified children before her. As she scrambled into the hidden path, she heard a sound, a rifle shot. It came not from the camp, but from a ridge 200 yards to the north. There he is, a deputy shouted. The savage! He is on the ridge! The posse's attention snapped away from the camp. They spurred their horses, firing their pistols wildly toward the ridge. After him. Do not let him escape. Chayton had made himself a target. He was a ghost, a flicker of movement, drawing the posse away from the camp, away from her, away from the children. He led them on a dangerous, impossible chase through the high canyons, a land he knew as well as his own skin, and a land that would swallow them whole. Elena huddled by the seep, the children pressed against her, their small bodies trembling. They waited for hours, listening to the faint, distant sounds of shouts and an occasional shot, until only silence and the trickle of the water remained. He had saved them. He had risked his own life to draw the fire away from her. The sickness came, as it always did in a drought. It came from the Copper and Crown work camp in the valley, a sprawling, filthy collection of tents and misery. A woman found their camp. She had followed the rumors, the whispers of a nurse in the hills. She was Mexican, the wife of a laborer, her face etched with desperation. Por favor, señora, she wept, clutching Elena's skirt. Los niños, my son, he is burning. The water, it is bad. Por favor. Elena packed her bag. Chayton stood in her path. This is not your fight, he said, his voice tight. They are the enemy. Their children are not, she said, and pushed past him. The railroad camp was a circle of hell. The air was thick with filth and despair. The foreman, a hard man with Vickers's coldness but none of his intelligence, saw her. We do not need your kind here. Traitor! The children are sick, she said, pushing into a tent. 3 small children lay on filthy pallets, their bodies limp with fever, their skin hot and dry. It was dysentery, dehydration. They will die without clean water, she told the foreman, her voice shaking with rage. He laughed. They drink what we drink. It is good enough. Now get out. She did what she could. She used her last stores of quinine and cooled their bodies with damp rags. But she knew it was useless without water. She returned to the ridge as the sun set, her heart a cold knot of fury. Chayton was waiting. He said nothing. That night, she filled 2 large water skins from Tuashin. That is our life, he said, his voice pained. It is for the children. They are children, too, she said. In the dark, she crept back down the mountain. She found the woman's tent. She pressed the heavy skins into her hands. For the children only, she whispered. Do not let anyone see. Boil it first. 2 days later, the woman, Maria, returned. Her son was sitting up. The fever was broken. She did not have money. She had no words. She simply took a humble necklace from around her own neck. It was made of dried, painted corn kernels, strung on a piece of sinew. A poor, precious thing. She pressed it into Elena's hand. Then she touched Elena's chest, right over her heart. Madre, she whispered. Mother. Elena looked at the necklace. This time, the word did not sting. It did not feel like a lie. It was a name. She put the necklace over her head. The story of the healing, of the miracle, reached Giles Vickers. He was a cold, logical man. He put the pieces together. The nurse who healed a gray spur. The nurse who refused $500. The nurse who healed his sick laborers with... what? He looked at his maps. The posse had failed to capture the tracker. Hale's warrants were useless. But the nurse had access to something. Clean water. The water was there. He was sure of it. And the tracker was protecting it. And the nurse was protecting the tracker. He realized he did not need to find the water. He needed leverage. He summoned the leader of the Gray Spurs. Hale is a fool, Vickers said. I am done with legal games. That tracker protects those children. I want one. Get me one of the children. Chayton felt the change in the air. The patrols were no longer random. They were not looking for the camp. They were hunters. They were watching. He saw the glint of a spyglass on a high ridge. Elena found him standing watch, his body taut, his guilt, the old guilt of the patrol he had led, the families he had failed, was rising in him. He was back in that canyon, the smell of gunpowder and blood in his nose. They are not looking for me, he said, his voice strained. They are watching the children. He was terrified, not for himself, but that the past was a circle, and he was doomed to fail again. They prepared for the storm. Chayton set more snares and deadfalls around the camp. He drove another stake into the ground. Not for sale. He sharpened his knife until the edge was a whisper. Elena knew her own preparation was needed. The most dangerous thing in the hills was the map inside Chaytonen's head. If they took him, if they tortured him. She pulled out the white ledger, the pristine book from her old life. She opened it to the first empty page. She took a piece of charcoal. Sit, she commanded him. Tell me the story of the water, from the beginning. He spoke. She did not draw a surveyor's map of lines and angles. She drew his story. The two rocks that looked like a sleeping woman, the patch of cottonwoods that grew where no trees should be, the way the seep vanished and reappeared 3 miles south. When she was finished, she tore the single precious page from the book. She looked at the thick leather cover. She found a loose stitch in the binding, carefully, with her suture needle. She worked the seam open just enough. She folded the map, thin and small, and slid it inside the leather, hiding it between the cover and the first page. The empty book was no longer empty. It now held the one secret in the territory worth killing for. The attack was not a frontal assault. It was a theft, precise and cruel. The watchers on the ridge, the ones Chayton had sensed, had waited. They had studied the camp's routines. They knew that Nantan, at 9 years old, was full of a restless pride, desperate to prove he was a man. He had been tasked with checking the snares near the lower creek bed, a task he had done a dozen times. He was supposed to stay within sight of the rocks, but he was late. It was Elena who noticed first. The sun was an hour past its peak, and the shadow of the main ridge was beginning to stretch. He should be back, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Chayton was instantly on his feet. The guilt that haunted his sleep was always present, just beneath the surface. He moved down the trail, not running, but with a ground-eating speed that was terrifying in its efficiency. Elena followed, her heart a cold, hard knot. He stopped at the creek bed. He knelt. Elena saw it, too. The tracks were a blur of chaos, the prints of Nantan's small moccasins, dug deep, skidding, and the heavy, waffle-soled boot prints of 3, maybe 4, men. A struggle. Then, Chayton saw it. Lying on the ground, pressed into the dry mud, was a small scrap of cloth. It was a piece of a red kerchief, one Elena had tied around Nantan's arm 2 days before to cover a scrape. It had been left deliberately. A challenge, a message. Chayton's face became a mask of stone, but his eyes were alive with a black, killing fire. His greatest fear, the one he had confessed to her, had come true. He had failed again. He had let them take one of the children. Before they had even returned to the camp, the shout came from the high ridge. It was the surveyor, the one who had brought the letter. He was just a small figure, far away, waving a white flag. The tracker, the nurse, a message from Mr. Vickers. His voice was thin, carried on the hot, dry wind. He has the boy is safe, he will be returned unharmed. Mr. Vickers demands a trade. The map, the coordinates for the Tuashin Springs. Chayton turned and stalked back to the camp. He tore through his supplies, his movements jerky, violent. He grabbed his rifle. He checked his ammunition. He was a man preparing for a war he could not win. "I will go," he said, his voice a low growl. "I will give them what they want." "No." Elena's voice was sharp. He stopped. "You will not. That is what they want." "He is my son!" Chayton roared, the word tearing out of him, raw and full of agony. "And you are their father," she countered, her voice ringing with a desperate, cold logic. "If you give them that map, they get the water. They will kill you to keep the secret. They will kill Nantan because he is a witness, and they will come back for the rest of us. You will not save him. You will kill us all." He stared at her, his face a landscape of torment. She was right. He knew she was right. The logic was brutal, inescapable. He slammed his good fist into the rock wall of the cave. "Then what?" he whispered. "What do we do?" "We buy time," she said. Her mind was working. The old battlefield triage. What is the most immediate threat? You need the dark. You need time to think, to track. I will give it to you. She walked to him. "Tell them yes. Tell them I will bring the map. Not you, me. I am the nurse. I am the white woman. They will see me as weak, as someone they can bargain with. They will not expect a trick from me." "They will take you," he said, his voice flat. "Yes, and you will use that time to find him." "No, I will not trade you." "It is not a trade," she said, her hands clenching. "It is a distraction. They want the map. I need something to give them." A sudden, desperate idea formed. She ran to her bag and pulled out the white ledger. The real map was safe, stitched into the cover. She ripped out a clean, new page. She grabbed a piece of charcoal. "Quickly," she said to him, "describe a place. A real place, but a dry one. A place that looks like it should have water, but does not. A fool's spring." He understood. His mind, the one that held the sacred map, worked. The south fork of Serpent Cut, the canyon branches. The left branch is dry. It ends in a box canyon of black rock. It always smells of damp, but it is a lie. The rock sweats. There is no spring. Her hands flew. She drew the canyon, the branching fork, the false landmark of a broken-horned goat skull he described. She made it look real, plausible. She folded the paper and tucked it deep into her skirt pocket. "I will go," she said. "I will tell them to meet me on the high perch at sunset. You will take the other path. You will find Nantan. I will stall them." "He will not be at the perch," Chayton said. "Vickers is not a fool. He will have the boy hidden, guarded." "Then you will find him," she said, her voice full of a certainty she did not feel. "I will keep Vickers busy." The sun was a bloody smear in the west when Elena walked out onto the high flat rock known as Vulture's Perch. It was exposed, with a sheer drop on 3 sides. Giles Vickers was there. Marshall Hale was with him, his rifle held casually in the crook of his arm. 4 gray spurs fanned out, their hands on their holsters. Chayton was with her. He had refused to let her go alone. "I will be the proof," he had said. "They see me. They know the map is real." Nantan was not there. "Mrs. Ward, tracker." Vickers smiled, a thin, satisfied expression. "A pleasure. Where's the map? Where is the boy? Elena countered, her voice carrying in the wind. He is safe. He will be delivered to your camp as soon as I have what I came for. No, Elena said. We see the boy. He walks to us. Then I give you the map. Vickers laughed. A short, barking sound. You are in no position to bargain, nurse. We are, Chayton said, his voice a low rumble. No boy, no map. You can kill us, but you will never find the water, and your railroad will die of thirst right here. Hale raised his rifle. Do not tempt us, Apache. Vickers held up a hand. He was a man of cold calculation. He needed the map. Fine, a compromise. He motioned to one of his men. The man raised a pistol and fired one shot into the air. 5 minutes later, 2 more riders appeared. They had Nantan. The boy was bound, a dirty gag in his mouth. He was alive. His eyes were wide with terror. There, Vickers said. You see him, now, the map. Let him go, Elena said, her body trembling. Let him walk to us. Vickers considered. He looked at Chayton. He looked at Elena. Very well. Let the boy go. Let him walk. If either of you moves. He nodded to Hale. Shoot the tracker first. The gray spur cut Nantan's bonds. He shoved the boy forward. Run, you little rat! Nantan stumbled, fell, and scrambled to his feet. He ran, his small legs pumping, his eyes fixed on Chayton. Chayton knelt. Run past me, Nantan, he commanded, his voice urgent. Do not stop. Go to Tala. Go to the camp. Do not look back. Now. The boy obeyed, a small, fleeing shadow. Elena let out a breath she had been holding for an hour. Now, she said, pulling the folded paper from her pocket. The map. Vickers' eyes gleamed. Give it to me. I will set it on the rock, she said. When I step back, you can take it. She placed the paper on the ground. She took 2 steps back, standing beside Chayton. Vickers smiled. He started to walk forward. You see, Mrs. Ward, progress is inevitable. Now, Chayton, Elena screamed. She did not scream it at him. She screamed it at the sky. A sudden, violent gust of wind hit the perch. It was not a natural wind. It was the first breath of a dust storm. One Chayton had seen building in the south for hours. One he had timed his entire, desperate gamble against. The sky turned a sickening yellow-brown. The wind howled, a sudden blinding wall of sand and grit. It is a trick, Hale roared. Chayton did not hesitate. He grabbed Elena's arm. Run! They dove from the high perch onto the narrow goat trail below. Just as the world dissolved into chaos. Vickers was screaming. Find them! Shoot, shoot them! Gunfire erupted, the shots blind, the muzzle flashes pathetic sparks in the overwhelming, choking dust. But Hale was not blind. He was not on the perch. He had been waiting. He was an ambush. As Elena and Chayton scrambled down the rocky path, a single rifle shot cracked from above them. It was a sound that was different from the others, a sharp, clear, calculated shot. Chayton grunted, a sound as if he had been punched. He shoved Elena hard, pushing her flat against the rock face. He stumbled, his legs buckling. He was hit. Go! He gasped, his voice tight with pain. Elena, run! Get to the children! She looked. The dust was so thick she could barely see him, but she could see the blood. It was dark, pumping from his left shoulder. The gray spurs were coming, shadows in the storm, coughing and cursing. Elena's world narrowed to the man on the ground. She had lost one husband to the earth. She had run from that death. She would not run from this one. The fear she felt was a white-hot, singular thing. It was not for herself. It was for him. I am not leaving you, she said, her voice a low, fierce command. She grabbed him, pulling his good arm over her shoulder. Get up, Chayton! Move! He was heavy, a dead weight, but she was strong. She hauled him to his feet. As she pulled him, her hand brushed the pocket of her skirt, the fake map. With a single, fluid motion, she pulled it out and let it fall to the trail. A gamble. "Now," she grunted, her body straining. "We move." They half ran, half fell down the narrow canyon, the storm their only ally, his blood leaving a dark trail on the stones. They made it to the camp as the storm began to subside, leaving the air thick and yellow. The children were huddled in the back of the small cave, Nantan with them, weeping silently. When they saw Elena stumbling, covered in dust, supporting a bleeding, gray-faced Chaitan, they ran. Tala, Luyu, Vico, they did not run to him. They ran to her. They grabbed her skirts, their small faces buried in the fabric, their bodies shaking. "Ma," Tala cried, the Apache word for mother, a name she had never used. "Ma." Luyu and Vico echoed it, a small, desperate chorus. "Ma, ma." Chaitan, leaning heavily against the cave wall, heard it. He looked at this woman, this impossible woman, covered in dust and his blood, who had faced down Vickers and was now surrounded by his children. He just watched her, his eyes dark with pain, shining with something she had never seen before. "Get him down," she ordered Tala, her voice all nurse again. "Get me the water, the clean water." She cut his shirt away. The bullet had gone through. It was high, tearing muscle, but it had missed the bone. It was bad, but he would live. She cleaned the wound, her hands perfectly steady. She packed it, stitched the worst of it, and bound it tightly. He never made a sound. He just watched her face. "Miles away, on the high trail," one of the gray spurs shouted. "Hail, boss, I found it, the map." Vickers snatched the paper from his hand. He uncurled it, shielding it from the wind. He saw the drawing, the canyon, the broken horn goat skull. "South Fork," he said, his voice triumphant. "It is just as I thought. He was hiding it to the south. Take a crew. Go. Now. Find that spring." The news of the kidnapping and the nurse's stand traveled faster than the railroad. It reached the C&C camp, carried by the same wind. Maria, the woman whose son Elena had saved, heard it. A quiet, dangerous anger began to build. "They took her son," she said to the other wives, "after she gave us her water, after she saved our children. Vickers gives us poison," an Irish laborer muttered into his beer. "La Madre, she gives us life, and Vickers tried to kill her." The lines were drawn. It was no longer a simple fight over land. It was a fight between the family on the ridge and the corporation in the valley. 2 days passed. Chaitan was feverish, weak, but the wound was clean. Elena sat by him, bathing his face. The children were asleep, a pile of limbs near the fire. He reached up with his good hand. He did not touch her. He touched the corn kernel necklace she wore. Then, slowly, he reached for the thin leather cord around his own neck. He pulled it over his head. It had a single, smooth, dark river stone on it, a stone with a natural hole worn through the center. "My mother's," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the dust and the pain. "From her home, the river, before it ran dry. She gave it to me, to keep my heart strong." He held it out, his palm flat. He pressed the stone into her hand. It was not a gift. It was a testament, a piece of his soul. Elena closed her fingers around the cool, smooth stone. She did not speak. She did not need to. She understood the promise. That night, she sat watch, the stone clutched in her hand. The air was unnaturally still after the storm, and she heard it. It was not a distant whistle. It was the chug, chug, chug of the engine, the shriek of metal wheels on a new-laid track. They were not waiting for the false map. They were not waiting for anything. The train was here. It was coming. The sound of the train was no longer a distant whistle. It was a heavy, rhythmic pulse that vibrated in the rock. a sound that felt like an iron heart beating in the earth. It was close. It was coming. Chaitin stood by the small fire, the bandage on his left shoulder stark white against his skin. He was testing the tautness of a long, heavy rope. His movements were stiff, his face pale with the pain of the healing wound, but his eyes were clear. "They will be at Serpent Cut by dawn," he said, his voice low. "The track is laid. They will bring the heavy cars, the rails, the hammers. If they pass the cut, they will be at the spring by noon." Elena was packing her medical bag, bandages, suture needles, a small bottle of carbolic. "You are not going," he said. It was not a question. "You will take the children, go deep into the seep, hide until I come." She finished packing the bag and tied it shut. "You are wounded. Chaitin, your shoulder is weak. You cannot use a rifle properly. You cannot fight and climb." "I will not fail," he said, his voice a low growl of desperation. "You will not go alone," she said, standing to face him. "I am going with you as your medic." "No, it is a battle. It is not a place for you." "It is exactly the place for me." Her voice was fierce, shaking with an intensity that made him pause. "Where else should I be in Dry Willow? They called me a barren field, a woman worth nothing because my body could not make a child." The confession hung in the cold night air, a secret she had guarded with shame her entire life. She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My womb is empty. Chaitin, it is a cold, dead place, but my life is finally not—" Her hands clenched. "Those children are my family. This land is my home. You are—" She could not say it. "I will not hide in a cave and wait to lose everything. I am going." He looked at her for a long time. The firelight carved shadows under his high cheekbones. He saw her pain, the old, deep wound that had nothing to do with a knife. He remembered the children crying Maya. He remembered her taking the water to the enemy camp. He reached out with his good hand and placed it on her shoulder. His touch was firm. "My mother told me," he said, his voice soft. "That family is not the blood you are born with. It is the blood you are willing to shed. It is the people you choose to stand and protect every morning when the sun rises." He let his hand fall. "We are family, Elena. We go together." They left the children with Tala, the oldest, in the deep, hidden cave where the spring of Tuashin began. The air was cool and safe. "Do not come out," Elena commanded, her voice steady. "No matter what you hear, you stay and you protect the water. You are the guardians now." Tala nodded, her young face grave, a small woman holding her brothers close. Elena and Chaitin moved through the moonless dark. He led her on paths that were not paths, moving through the shadows, his feet making no sound. He was still weak, and she carried the heaviest of the ropes. They did not speak. Their tracks were covered by the dry leaves of the canyon floor. Serpent Cut was a narrow slash in the rock, barely wide enough for the train. The newly laid tracks gleamed faintly in the starlight. This was the bottleneck. This was where they would make their stand. They set to work. Chaitin used a crowbar, his breath hissing with the effort, to pry up a plate connecting two rails. Elena, using a heavy stone, hammered wooden spikes and wedges into the gap, angling the rail just enough. It would not stop the train, but it would guide the front wheels off the track and into the rock wall. They strung the heavy ropes across the cut, low to the ground, designed to catch the axles and the undercarriage, to pull the heavy cars off balance. A stone clicked, high above them. Chaitin froze. He put a hand on Elena's arm, pressing her into the shadows. He looked up. 3 men, gray spurs. They were scouts, moving ahead of the train on foot, checking the track. "See anything?" a low voice whispered. "Nothing. It is dark as a pit. Let us get on with it." They were coming down the narrow path. Chaitin did not wait. He moved, his knife in his good hand. He was a shadow, an explosion of silent violence. He met the first man on the path, his hand clamping over the man's mouth as the knife found its mark. The second man saw the movement. He shouted, "Ambush!" He drew his pistol, but he was too slow. Chaitin was already on him, his body a solid, driving force. The third man, a big bearded rider, saw Chaitin struggling with the second. He saw Chaitin's left arm was useless. Pinned to his side, the man laughed. A low, ugly sound. He drew a long, heavy skinning knife and lunged, not at Chaitin's front, but at his wounded, undefended left side. Elena saw it. The glint of the blade, the man's intent. She did not think. She did not plan. She moved. She threw her body between the knife and Chaitin's back. The man grunted, surprised, but his momentum was too great. The knife, meant to bury itself deep in Chaitin's ribs, slashed across Elena's upper arm. The pain was a white-hot searing fire. It stole her breath. She cried out, a short, sharp sound, as she fell. Chaitin heard her. He spun, his face a mask of primal fury. He left the second man and drove his knife, with all his remaining strength, into the third. Then he was kneeling beside her. "Elena!" The alarm was raised. Shouts echoed from further down the track. The train was close. "The plan," she gasped, clutching her arm. The blood was hot, soaking her sleeve, running between her fingers. "The plan is finished," he said. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her from the cut, scrambling up the rocks to a small, hidden alcove they had prepared. A small shelf of rock with a canvas lean-to, a water skin, and a fire pit. He laid her down. The sky in the east was just beginning to turn a pale, sick gray. Dawn was coming. The train was coming. She was shaking. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the cold and the sharp, throbbing agony in her arm. It was a deep gash. She was trembling from shock, from fear, and from a strange, overwhelming relief. He was alive. "My bag," she whispered, her teeth chattering. I need a stitch." He looked at the wound. He looked at her pale, trembling face. He gently pushed her hands away from the gash. He picked up a clean cloth from her medical bag. His touch was impossibly soft. He pressed the cloth to the wound. "I will do it," he said, his voice a low murmur, almost lost in the wind. He looked at her, at this woman who had taken a blade for him. She was shaking so hard she could barely breathe. He leaned close, his breath warm on her cold cheek. "I'll be gentle." The words were a promise, a vow of safety in a world that had only ever offered her violence. He took the suture needle she had intended for herself. His large, rough hands that had killed 3 men in as many minutes, were now perfectly steady. He began to sew the wound closed, his stitches wide and clumsy compared to hers. But they were secure. She did not flinch. She just watched his face, his dark eyes full of a concentration and a tenderness she had never known. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was distant. When he was finished, he bandaged the arm tightly. He did not move away. His good hand, stained with her blood, came up and touched her face, his thumb brushing the dust from her cheek. She stopped shaking. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of hunger. It was a kiss of gratitude, of recognition. It was a kiss that tasted of dust and iron and fear. It was the sealing of a bond, a choice made in the crucible of battle. The small fire they had lit crackled in the pit, a tiny point of warmth against the cold dawn. The passion that bound them, a thing forged in blood and desperation, burned hotter than fear. He pulled back. They did not speak. Their roles were the same. He was the warrior. She was the healer. But they were no longer 2 people. They were one. A shout came from below. "Up here, the path." Chaitin was on his feet, his knife in his hand, pulling Elena behind him. But the men who scrambled up the trail were not gray spurs. They were gaunt, dirty men, wearing the tattered trousers of the railroad. They carried sledgehammers, pickaxes and crowbars. Their faces were grim. Maria's husband, Miguel, was in the lead. He held a storm lantern, and his other hand gripped a heavy spike maul. He saw Elena, her arm bandaged. He saw Chaitan, wounded but standing. "Madre," Miguel said, his voice a low rumble. He nodded to her, his respect absolute. He looked at Chaitan. "She saved my son and many others. We heard the shots, we heard the train. Vickers sent it. He thinks he will own the water." Miguel spat on the ground. "Vickers does not own the mountain. He does not own us." He raised his hammer. "We pay our debts. We fight with you." Chaitan looked at the dozen men who had followed Miguel. They were an army of the desperate, the forgotten. He nodded once. The sound of the engine was deafening now, a great iron beast coming up the canyon. "The ropes," Chaitan commanded, his voice sharp. "The spikes. We must work fast. We will not just turn this train. We will bury it." Elena looked back toward the path to the seep. The children were safe. She turned to Miguel. "Show me what to do," she said, her good arm ready. The world exploded in a scream of metal. The train, a great black serpent, hit the sabotaged rail just as Chaitan and the workers had planned. The engine's front wheels jumped the track, biting deep into the canyon's rock wall with a grinding metallic shriek that echoed off the cliffs. The engine did not stop. It buckled, momentum shoving it forward. The car behind it, a flatbed loaded with heavy steel rails, lifted into the air and crashed sideways, steel scraping against stone, throwing sparks like 1,000 shooting stars. The next car accordioned into it. A lantern hung from the engineer's cab, shattered. Oil splashed onto the hot engine block. In a heartbeat, the oil ignited. A bright orange blossom of fire roared to life, climbing the side of the engine, licking at the wooden flatbeds. "They are derailing us," Vickers' voice, thin and raging, cut through the chaos from a passenger car at the rear. Shoot them all, it is the Apache." Gunfire erupted from the train. Gray spurs, hired to protect the cargo, began firing wildly into the pre-dawn shadows, their muzzle flashes illuminating the narrow, dust-filled cut. Chaitan, Miguel, and the other workers returned fire from the rocks above. It was not a battle. It was a massacre in the making. Elena crouched behind a boulder, her medical bag at her feet, her newly bandaged arm throbbing, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was war. "Stay down," Chaitan roared at her, his rifle pressed to his good shoulder, firing with a calm, deadly rhythm. The fire on the engine was growing, fed by the dry wood of the flatbeds and the oil from the axles. A man, a CNC engineer, his clothes smoking, crawled from the twisted cab. He was screaming, his leg trapped by a piece of twisted metal. "Help me!" he shrieked, batting at the flames that were just inches from his feet. The gray spurs ignored him, firing into the rocks. Elena saw him. He was the enemy. He was the man driving the machine that had come to destroy their home. He was also a man, burning alive. "Cover me!" she yelled to Miguel. "Madre, no!" he shouted. She did not listen. She slid from behind the rock, running low, her red scarf a blur in the half-light. Bullets whined past her head, chipping stone, zinging into the metal of the train. She reached the engineer, the heat of the fire scorching her face. "My leg, it is trapped," he cried, his eyes wide with terror. She saw the steel pin. She put her good hand and her wounded arm against a piece of wreckage, her body screaming in protest, and pushed. The metal groaned. "Pull," she commanded. The man wrenched his leg free, a raw, bloody mess, just as the flatbed above them shifted, sending a cascade of burning embers onto the spot where he had been. She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the relative safety of the rocks, away from the crossfire. High above the chaos, on the roof of the teetering passenger car, two men met. Chaitan had used the gunfire as cover. Climbing the wreckage to find the head of the snake, he found Marshal Hale. Hale was not shooting. He was standing, rifle ready, guarding the car. He saw Chayton and raised his rifle. "It is over. Apache, this is legal. I have the warrant." He tapped a paper in his breast pocket. "You are trespassing on C&C property. You are all under arrest for treason." "And you," Chayton said, his voice a low growl, "are under arrest for bribery." He held up a small, folded paper. It was not a map. It was a receipt, a payment voucher from the C&C office, signed by Giles Vickers, countersigned by Hale. A payment for land acquisition consultation, dated the same day Elena's clinic was condemned. Miguel had found it in a stack of discarded papers at the work camp. Hale's face, smug and righteous, turned a sickly gray. "That is a lie, a forgery." "Is it?" Chayton said. "Or is it the price of a town marshal?" Hale's pretense of law vanished. He was a cornered rat. He lunged, swinging his rifle like a club. Down in the canyon, the battle raged. The gray spurs, realizing they were trapped, fought with a desperate ferocity. Vickers, his face a mask of fury, was trying to organize them, screaming at them to get the fire out, to save the train. One of the gray spurs, a man with a thick beard and dead eyes, looked at Vickers. He looked at the fire. He looked at the blocked canyon. He had not been paid in a month. He saw Vickers edging toward the back of the car, toward a heavy strongbox. Vickers was not trying to save the train. He was trying to save the payroll. "You are not going anywhere, boss," the gray spur growled. "Get back to fighting, you fool!" Vickers shrieked. The gray spur raised his pistol, his aim steady. "You owe me wages." He fired. Vickers looked down at his chest, a small, dark hole appearing on his pristine vest. His mouth opened, but only a small puff of air came out. He toppled backward, the strongbox falling open, scattering bundles of cash onto the floor of the car. The C&C line broke. The betrayal shattered their chain of command. "He is dead! Vickers is dead!" a man shouted. "It is a rout! Grab the cash!" The gray spurs stopped fighting the workers and started fighting each other. A chaotic, greedy scramble for the money. In that moment of sudden, violent quiet, a new sound cut through the air, a high, terrified scream. "My..." Elena's head snapped up. Tala. She was not in the cave. She had followed them. The girl, desperate not to be left behind, had crept out of the seep and gotten lost, emerging from a cleft in the rock right into the middle of the battle. She was frozen, standing on the tracks between the burning train and the rocks, a stray bullet kicking up dust at her feet. A gray spur, turning from the strongbox, saw her. He saw the Apache child. He raised his pistol, his face a snarl of blind hate. "No!" Elena screamed. She ran, her body moving before her mind, her only thought to get to the child. She did not have a weapon. She did not have a plan. She just had her body. She dove, tackling Tala to the ground, covering the girl's small, trembling form with her own. She hunched over, her back to the gunman, waiting for the impact, the hot, tearing pain of the bullet. The shot never came. The gunfire stopped, all of it. The C&C workers, the gray spurs, Chayton and Hale on the roof. Everyone froze. They stared at the image. The white nurse, her arm bleeding, shielding the Apache child on the ground, her body a stark, defiant sacrifice. Tala, her face buried in Elena's chest, sobbed the word again. "Mama!" The word echoed in the sudden, terrible silence of the canyon. Chayton, on the roof, saw his chance. Hale was distracted, his gaze fixed on the woman and child below. Chayton did not swing. He did not fight. He raised his rifle. He was not aiming at Hale. He was aiming past him, at the rear of the last heavy car. He fired. The shot was clean. The bullet severed the heavy brake line coupling. There was a hiss of air, a groan of metal. The heavy flatbed cars, loaded with thousands of pounds of steel rails and no longer held by the engine, began to move, slowly at first, and then with gathering, unstoppable speed. They began to roll backward. "The cars!" a worker shouted. "They are loose!" The heavy cars rolled back down the track, back toward the mouth of Serpent Cut, running faster and faster. The last car, with its failed brakes, hit the canyon curve, derailed, and slammed into the opposite wall, blocking the canyon completely. The cars behind it smashed into it, a final, deafening crash of steel and splintering wood. The pass was sealed. A new sound entered the silence, a high, lonely train whistle. It was the next train, the one following Vickers, waiting for the all-clear. The whistle sounded again, confused, then a long, mournful blast. It was the signal for a reverse. It was abandoning the route. The battle was over. Elena slowly got to her feet, pulling Tala with her. She was shaking, her knees weak. She looked at the wreckage. The fire was dying. The canyon was filled with smoke and the groans of wounded men. Men from both sides. Gray Spurs, C&C engineers, and two of Miguel's workers lay on the ground, coughing, their lungs filling with the acrid smoke. Elena pushed Tala toward Miguel. "Get her safe," she said. She picked up her bag. She walked to the nearest man, a Gray Spur, who was choking, his face blue. She knelt and began to work, clearing his airway. A whisper moved through the surviving workers as they watched her. She saved the engineer. She saved the child. Now she saves him. Miguel's voice was full of awe. "Ella pertenece a la vida." She belongs to life. On the roof, Hale was trapped. The workers, their faces grim, climbed up. They took his rifle. They did not kill him. "You are the law," Miguel said, his voice cold. He held up the bribery receipt Chayton had tossed down. "You will answer to it." They bound his hands. The sun was fully up now, casting a sick red light over the canyon. The wreckage of the train was a smoking monument to greed. The saguaro cactuses on the ridge looked like silent, judging men. The desert, which had roared with the sound of iron and gunpowder, was suddenly, profoundly silent. All that was left was the wind, the smell of smoke, and the sound of breathing. The iron storm had passed, but the silence it left was heavy and fragile. The wreckage in Serpent Cut was a stark, smoking barricade, a tombstone for the Copper and Crown's ambition in that canyon. But the war was not over. It had simply changed its uniform. From the leather of the Gray Spurs to the crisp wool suits of law and government. 3 days after the battle, 2 men rode into the valley. They were not soldiers or surveyors. They were federal inspectors from Tucson, sent by the territorial governor to investigate the civil disturbance that had halted the C&C Railroad, a line vital to Washington's interests. Their leader was a man named Harlan, a tall, thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a face that seemed incapable of smiling. He carried a heavy leather briefcase. They found a community in motion. The survivors of the battle had gathered at the ridge, near the seep. It was no longer just Chayton's camp. It was a sanctuary. Miguel and the other C&C defectors had brought their families. Maria, the woman who had first called Elena Madre, had organized the women, a Navajo family, whose sheep had been dying of thirst, had been guided there by rumors of the water. Even Mr. E., the quiet owner of the Dry Willow Mercantile, had arrived with a wagon load of flour and salt, his own quiet protest against Marshal Hale's thuggery. The community met the inspectors not with guns, but with a wall of quiet, stubborn presence. Harlan unrolled a large territorial map on a makeshift table. Marshal Hale, now in irons and guarded by his own former deputy, was a silent, humiliated witness. "This is a simple matter," Harlan said, his voice crisp and devoid of emotion. He tapped the map. "According to our records, this entire section, including the ridge you occupy and the canyon you have, Obstructed is unregistered land. It belongs to no one. A cold fear settled over the group. Which means, Harlan continued, that it falls under the Public Domain Act. It is, by law, the property of the United States government, to be allocated as it sees fit for the public good. And the public good. He looked pointedly at the ruined train line. Is the railroad? He was going to take it all. The battle had been for nothing. The law, which had failed to protect them, was now being used as a weapon to dispossess them. This land is not empty, Miguel said, stepping forward, his hat in his hands but his voice strong. It is our home. We, the workers of the CNC, we built that line. We were paid in poison water and lies. This place, he gestured to the seep, is the only clean water in this valley. It belongs to the people who live here. Harlan looked at him over his spectacles. You are squatters. Sir, you have no deed. You have no title. We have this, Maria said, stepping to Miguel's side. She held up the corn kernel necklace. The madre, she saved my son. She gave us her water when Vickers let our children die. This is her land, by the law of God, if not by the law of men. Sentiment, Harlan said, dismissive. I deal in paper, in law. Then, Nantan walked forward. He was 9 years old, his face scrubbed clean, but his eyes held the memory of his capture. He held a piece of smooth bark, the one Elena had used for his lessons. He had been practicing. His voice was small, but it was clear and did not tremble. He read the words Elena had helped him write the night before. We are the children of the ridge. We are Apache. We are Mexican. We are white. We were hungry, and this land fed us. We were thirsty, and this water let us drink. We need water to grow. You cannot sell the rain. You cannot sell the thing that keeps us alive. He finished and looked Harlan in the eye. The inspector, for the first time, looked uncomfortable. A child's declaration was not something he had a form for. The silence was broken by a new voice, one that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. An old man, his face a beautiful map of wrinkles, walked out of the crowd. He was an Apache elder, one Chayton had sent for, one who had not been seen near the white settlements in 20 years. He did not speak to Harlan. He walked to the map. He looked at the paper lines the white men had drawn. Then he reached into a small bag at his waist and pulled out a single, smooth, dark river stone, the same kind of stone Chayton had given Elena. He placed the stone not on the X Harlan had drawn for the spring, but far to the east, on the highest peak of the mountains. He began to speak, his voice a low, melodic chant. Chayton translated, his own voice filled with a quiet reverence. He says this is where the water is born. When the sky gives its gift, the water hides in the rock. It does not run on the top, where the sun can steal it. It runs inside. It is a promise from the mountain. It flows from the stone, under the desert, to this place. The elder moved the stone slowly across the map, tracing a path that was not on any survey. It was a line of story, of memory, of generations. He says the map is a lie. It shows a dead world. It does not show the path of the rain. He says this water is the blood of his ancestors. It is not for one man to own or sell. It is for all to share. The elder looked at Harlan. He did not look angry. He looked sad. You cannot own a thing you do not understand. Harlan stared at the stone, his legal mind struggling to categorize this. This was not testimony. It was myth. This is all very compelling, Harlan said, regaining his composure. But it is not law. The law is clear. Unregistered land reverts to the government. The railroad has a federal charter. Their need is paramount. Elena stepped forward. Her arm was in a clean sling, the red scarf tied around it. She looked tired. She looked wounded, but she looked unconquerable. Inspector Harlan, she said, her voice clear and calm. You speak of the law. Let us speak of the law. You arrested Marshal Hale. Harlan nodded. For bribery, obstruction, and conspiracy. He will be tried in Tucson. And Mr. Vickers is dead, she continued. Shot by his own men while trying to steal the payroll, after setting fire to his own train. We have testimony to that effect. Harlan agreed. So the C&C, by your own admission, is a criminal enterprise. They used fraud to steal my land. They used bribery to corrupt the law. They used violence to kidnap a child. And they were, in the end, destroyed by their own greed. She stepped closer to the table. You say the law is paper, but you have just proven that their papers are all lies. Their titles are false. Their warrants are bought. Their entire claim to this land is based on crime. She tapped the map. You are right. This is public domain. And we, she gestured to the miners, the widows, the children, are the public. You say the railroad is the public good. What good is a railroad that must murder children to lay its tracks? What good is progress that kills the very people it claims to serve? Her voice rose, ringing with the passion that had burned in the canyon. Justice is not just paper, Mr. Harlan. Justice is who gets to drink. Justice is who gets to live. You are here to represent the public good. Look at it. The wind shifted. A small, scrappy newspaper from a neighboring town, the Arizona Clarion, had sent a young reporter, a man Elena had once treated for a rattlesnake bite. He was writing furiously in a small notebook. 2 days later, his story ran. It was not buried in the back. It was the entire front page. He did not write about a civil disturbance. He wrote about a corrupt marshal and a greedy corporation. He wrote about the battle in the cut. He wrote about the woman who healed her enemies. He wrote about the children asking for water. He did not call the place Section 34. He called it by the name he had seen carved on the cedar stake at the entrance to the camp. The Not For Sale Ridge. The story was picked up by papers in Tucson, in Phoenix, the Copper and Crown, already reeling from the financial loss and the death of Vickers, found itself in a storm of public outrage. Their investors grew nervous. The territorial governor, facing an election, suddenly found unfettered progress to be a very unpopular idea. The C&C quietly, furiously, announced they were rerouting their line 30 miles to the south, through the waterless flats, at a cost of millions. Inspector Harlan, a man of paper, found himself holding a very different set of papers. Petitions, letters, editorials. The public good had spoken. He rode back to the ridge 1 week after he had first come. The community was waiting. The small green tomato plants in Elena's garden had tiny, yellow flowers. Harlan unrolled a different map. He took a pen and a bottle of red ink. He drew a circle on the map, a circle with a radius of 5 miles, with Tuashin at its center. By the authority of the Arizona Territorial Governor, he said, his voice flat. This land is hereby designated a protected community water sanctuary. All mining, railroad, and commercial exploitation within this boundary is forbidden, pending a full federal survey. He stamped the map. The sound of the seal hitting the paper was as loud as a gunshot in the silence. It was over. They had won. A sound started. A single, tentative sound. Mr. Lee was tapping a small wooden flute. Then Miguel's wife, Maria, began to clap. A slow, rhythmic pulse. The Navajo family began a low, humming chant. From the town of Dry Willow, someone, hearing the news, began to ring the small church bell. The bell, the flute, the drum, the chant, a strange, discordant, beautiful harmony, a sound of reconciliation. Elena stood apart, watching. She watched Tala and Nantan and Luyu playing tag, their laughter bright and careless for the first time. She watched them run to the seep and splash water on their faces. They were safe. They were home. The old pain, the familiar thorn of her infertility, twisted in her heart. It was a cruel irony. She had fought for a future for everyone else's children. She had been called madre by a dozen people, but she was still barren. She was the one who had given them this life, but she could never make a life of her own. The victory felt hollow, a victory for everyone but the empty, aching place inside her. Chaitan came to stand beside her. He had watched her face. He had seen the shadow pass over her eyes. Even in this moment of triumph, he knew her, this woman of fire and sadness. He did not touch her. He just stood, watching the children he had saved, and the woman who had saved him. "You look sad," he said, his voice quiet. "I am happy," she whispered, the lie catching in her throat. They are so full of life." "You did this," he said. She shook her head, the old shame making her look away. I am the one who I cannot make life." He was silent for a long moment. Then he touched her arm, the one with his mother's stone tied to the bandage. He made her look at him. His eyes were dark, and they held no pity, only a profound, clear truth. "Elena," he said, his voice rough, "you are wrong. You did not just save them." He gestured, his good hand taking in the valley, the workers, the children, the tiny garden with its impossible flowers, the entire community breathing free for the first time. "You have given birth to hope for this entire valley." The iron had cooled. The smell of smoke had been scoured from Serpent Cut by the high, clean wind. The battle was over, but the work, the real work, had just begun. Chaitan's shoulder healed, the scar a puckered, angry red that Elena tended daily. Her own arm ached, a sharp reminder of the blade, but she worked through it. There was too much to do. The community on the ridge was no longer a camp. It was a settlement, a town born of defiance and shared thirst. The first task was the water. Miguel, who had laid tracks of steel for the C&C, now used his skill for the land. He and the other miners, their hands skilled with stone and iron, began to line the seep. They used the flat, red rocks of the canyon, setting them with a precision that turned the muddy pool into a clean, permanent basin. They dug a shallow, stone-lined channel, guiding the overflow to a trough for the mules and the Navajo family's sheep. Tuashin was no longer a secret. It was the public square. Elena's impossible garden, fed by the secure water, exploded with life. The 6 small tomato plants had become a tangled, thriving patch of green, their branches heavy with yellow flowers that swelled into pale, hard fruit. The community, seeing this, took heart. Miguel and his men, using their own saved seed, planted rows of pinto beans and squash. The ridge, once barren, was becoming a farm. From the cedar trees that sheltered them, Chaitan and Miguel began to build. They felled 2 of the oldest trees, the wood fragrant and strong. They were building a single, solid room. It was not a house. It was a school. One evening, as the walls of the new building stood silhouetted against the sunset, Tala came to Elena and Chaitan. The 4 children stood behind her, a small, serious line. "We have spoken," Tala said, her voice clear. She was 11, but she spoke with the gravity of an elder. "We are not orphans. We have a father." She looked at Chaitan, who stood very still. "And we have a mother." She looked at Elena. "We need a name." Tala continued. "The white men at the fort, the inspectors, they ask for a family name on their papers. We do not want to be called by the names of those who are gone." Nantan stepped forward, his small chest out. "We are of the ridge, we are of the water. We choose our name," Tala finished. "We will be called Ward Chaitan." Elena's heart seized. She looked at Chaitan. His face, so often a mask of stone, was working. He looked at the 4 children, his children, and he looked at Elena, his woman. He nodded once, his throat too thick to speak. Elena knelt. She did not cry. Her body was beyond the easy release of tears. She simply held out her hands, and the 4 children, who were not of her blood but were of her bone, her fight and her soul, came to her. The next day, Chayton took a fresh-cut piece of cedar. He worked all afternoon, his knife moving with a new, creative purpose. He was not carving a weapon. He was not carving a warning. He was carving a declaration. He hung it on the new wooden gate he had built for the garden. The letters were deep and proud. Not for sale. The community wove itself together. The miners, with their families, brought their own traditions. Maria and the other women, grateful for Elena's steady hand, began to dye and weave. They used crushed cochineal and wild plants to make thread. They wove small, tough scraps of cloth. They were all deep red. "Like your scarf, Madre," Maria said, pressing one into Elena's hand. "It is a sign. If one of us is sick, if a child is hurt, we will hang this on our door. It is the call for the healer." It was no longer a memento of a dead husband. It was a uniform. It was the flag of her new nation. That night, Elena sat by the fire, the sounds of the children sleeping and the low murmur of the adults' conversations surrounding her. She felt safe, for the first time in her life. She felt utterly, completely safe. She reached into her bag and pulled out the white ledger, the book she had carried from Dry Willow, the one that symbolized her empty, unwritten life. The real map of Tuashin was still hidden safely in its cover, but the pages were blank. She opened it to the first page. She took a piece of charcoal from the fire. Her hand, which had stitched wounds and held a child's head, was steady. She looked at the blank page, her barren field, and thought of Chayton's words, "You have given birth to hope." She began to write. The charcoal was rough, but the letters were clear. "Today is the first day I was loved without having to prove anything." Her old life had one last ghost to cast. He rode in a week later, on a tired horse, wearing a suit that was too fine for the desert and gray with dust. It was Thomas, her first husband. He found her by the new schoolhouse, sorting dried herbs. He dismounted, holding his hat in his hands. He was older, thinner, and the polished arrogance she remembered was gone, replaced by a deep, weary failure. "Elena," he said. He had to clear his throat. She stood. She was not angry. She was not sad. She felt nothing. He was a stranger. A page from a book she had finished reading. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" The C&C is finished. Vickers is dead. The entire enterprise collapsed." He looked around, his eyes wide with disbelief. He saw the stone-lined well, the thriving gardens, the solid new building. He saw the miners tipping their hats to her. He saw Tala run up, call her Maya, and run off again. "They told me in Dry Willow you were here," he stammered. "Elena, I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. What I said to you, a barren field. It was a cruelty. I see that now." He took a step closer. "Come back with me. We can go to Tucson. I have some money left. We can start again. I see now what a woman you are." She looked at him, her gaze clear and calm. She remembered the man who had left her, the man who had offered to sell her to Vickers for a place at his side. "I'm sorry for you, Thomas," she said, and her voice was kind. It was the kindness of a doctor for a patient, not a wife for a husband. "But I cannot go with you. I have a home." "A home," he said, looking at the rough-hewn camp. "This is not a home. This is a savage camp in the wilderness." "This," Elena said, gesturing to the school, to the garden, to the sound of the children laughing, "is the first true home I have ever known. It is a place where I am needed. It is a place where I am called by my right name." He saw the finality in her eyes. The woman he had discarded was gone. This person, this Madre of the Ridge, was someone he did not know at all. He got on his horse, a ghost from a life that no longer fit, and rode away. The last thread was cut. The newspaper from the Clarion arrived, brought by the young reporter who now visited weekly. bringing mail and supplies from Mr. Lee. The headline was stark. Marshall Hale found guilty, 10 years. The story detailed the bribery, the corruption, the partnership with Vickers. The reign of the C&C and its paper justice was definitively over. A new rhythm began on the ridge. Life settled into a pattern of work and learning. In the mornings, Chaitin took Nantan and Luyu, and now 2 of the miners' sons, into the high canyons. He taught them to read the sky. He taught them to track, not for war, but for life. He taught them the Apache names for the plants and the stars. In the afternoons, Elena was in the schoolhouse. She taught Tala, Vico, and the other children. She taught them their letters, their numbers. She taught them basic medicine. She taught them to write correspondence, so they would never again be tricked by a paper warrant. On the main wall of the schoolhouse, she hung a map. It was a large piece of cured deerskin. On one side, in black ink, she had drawn the geology of the valley, the science of the aquifer, the path of the water as she understood it from her studies. On the other side, the Apache elder had painted, in dyes of red and yellow ochre, the story of the rain, the sacred path of the ancestors from the mountain. The 2 maps sat side by side, 2 ways of knowing the same truth. The garden flourished under the long, hot sun. The day finally came when Elena walked to the tangle of vines and found it, the first tomato. It was not large, but it was perfectly red, warm from the sun, and heavy in her hand. A small, impossible fruit of faith. She did not eat it. She brought it to the communal table that evening. The entire community was there. Chaitin, the 4 children, Miguel and Maria, the Navajo elder, Mr. Lee, who had come for dinner, the young reporter, 12 people, the core of their new world. Elena took a knife and carefully, with the precision of a surgeon, she cut the tomato. She sliced it into 12 perfect small wedges. She passed the plate. Each person took 1 piece. They ate. No one spoke for a moment. Miguel closed his eyes. Maria smiled. Chaitin, who had lived on tough jerky and dry corn, tasted it, and a slow, rare smile spread across his face. "It is," the young reporter said, his pen for once still. "The best thing I have ever tasted in my life." It was the taste of water, of sun, of earth, and of hope. It was the taste of home. The long sunrise had begun. The nights were still cold, but the days were warm, and the light lingered. Elena would stand by the garden gate in the evenings, Chaitin at her side. They would listen. They would hear the sound of the children singing the alphabet, the sound of the miners laughing, the sound of the wind in the cedar, and, beneath it all, the quiet, constant, impossible sound of the water, running free. The years fell away like dry leaves, one season bleeding into the next. The garden on the ridge, Elena's patch of impossible faith, endured. It survived the deep freeze of 1881 and the flash flood of 1883. The tomato vines were thick as a man's arm. Their descendants planted all through the settlement. The valley, once defined by thirst, was now a patchwork of green. The children, the first generation of the ridge, were children no longer. Tala, who had been a small, fierce mother at 11, was now the teacher in the Cedar schoolhouse. She was 26, her voice the same steady, calm tone Elena had used on her. She taught Apache lore alongside English grammar, mathematics next to the science of the aquifer. Nantan, the boy who had been stolen, became the guardian of the seep. He was 24, quiet and watchful like his father. He knew the paths of the water, the ones on the map and the ones in his heart. He carried on Chaitin's sacred trust, teaching the new children how to read the land. Luyu, the quiet one Elena had first stitched for, found his voice in fire and steel. He was 22, the settlement's blacksmith, his hammer ringing out in the clear morning air, forging plowshares from the steel wreckage of the train. And Vico, the youngest, who had first called Elena Ma, was 20. He was a writer, a storyteller, a man whose easy laughter filled the valley. The old, defiant cedar stake, not for sale, still stood at the entrance to the valley, its letters deep and weathered. It was a landmark, but a new sign had been added. It was hung over the gate to the original garden, the place where Elena had first made her stand. Luyu had forged the iron hinges, and Tala had carved the words. She had carved them twice, first in the angular letters of the English alphabet, and beneath it, in the syllabics and symbols of the Apache language. The message was the same in both. She did not bear our blood, but she gave birth to our life. Inside the schoolhouse, framed on the wall, was the original, yellowed copy of the Arizona Clarion. The headline, "The Ridge That Chose Love," had become the settlement's founding document, a testament to their beginning. Beneath it, on the main table, was another document, the one that truly governed them. It was not a federal warrant. It was the charter of the Community Water Council, established in 1879. Miguel was its first chairman. Nantan was its chief steward. The law was simple, written in 3 languages: Apache, Spanish, and English. The water is a gift. The water is life. The water is not for sale. The water is to be shared. They had rituals every year at the first sign of the summer rains. The entire community gathered at the seep. Each child, upon reaching the age of 12, would add a new river stone to the basin's wall, a physical testament to the growing community, a promise to protect the source. And in the evenings, by the fire, the story was told. It was not the story of the battle, of the gunfire and the smoke. It was the story of the night before it. The children and grandchildren, born in the safety of the valley, would ask to hear it. "Tell us about the knife," they would say. "Tell us about the promise." And Elena, her hair now the color of silver, or Chaitan, his face a beautiful map of his life, would tell the story of the wound, the fear, and the quiet words in the dark. The legend of "I will be gentle" became the heart of their family. It was their oral history, a reminder passed down, a lesson that true courage was not born from violence, but from the promise of tenderness in a hard world. Gentleness, they taught, was what gave courage its meaning. Elena was older now. Her hands were scarred, not just from sutures, but from gardening, from building, from holding grandchildren she had not born but had earned. The empty ledger she had brought from Dry Willow, the one that symbolized her empty, unwritten life, was no longer empty. It was full. It was a history of the settlement, a record of births and deaths, a compendium of herbal remedies, a diary. On the last page, written in a hand that had grown strong and sure, was her final entry on the matter. "I used to think freedom meant going further, finding a new place where my past could not find me. I was wrong. Freedom is not going further. Freedom is standing fast where you have chosen. It is the right to say, 'This is my home,' and to have the world honor it." She sat on the porch of the small adobe house they had built near the school. Chaitan sat with her, his silence as comfortable as a shared blanket. He was older, too, his body scarred but his eyes as clear as the high desert sky. He had never been a man of many words. He did not need to be. He reached over, his hand rough and warm. He did not touch her face. He did not touch her hand. He touched the smooth, dark river stone that still hung from a leather cord around her neck. His mother's stone. He had given her his past, his history. She had given him a future. He smiled, a slow, quiet smile that was only for her. The world had moved on. Far in the distance, miles to the south, the faint whistle of the Copper and Crown's new line could be heard on a clear day. It was a scar on a different part of the desert, a reminder of the thirst that still drove the world. Sometimes, travelers, lost on the old survey trail, would find their way into the valley. They would stop at the gate, confused by the green. by the laughter, by the impossible sight of a town thriving on what should have been barren land. They would read the old, weathered sign first, not for sale. Then they would read the new one. She did not bear our blood, but she gave birth to our life. They would water their horses at the community trough, share a meal, and ride away, carrying the story of the ridge with them. If this story, this tale of a hard land and a chosen family, touched something quiet in your heart, then the West is not truly gone. It is not a place of just dust and gunfire. It is still alive, living in the way we choose to treat one another. It lives in every act of defiant hope. It lives in every garden planted in dry ground. The wind moved through the cedar trees, carrying the scent of wild sage and damp earth. The water of Tuashin murmured its constant, quiet promise, a family, chosen by grace and forged in fire. Watch the sun set on their valley, the valley that had been saved. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please share your city or country in the comments below so we can all connect. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. It truly helps us. And if you want to support us even more, hit that special hype button to help this story reach more listeners. We appreciate every one of you.